that my lens, my view as a Christian, and it wasn't till it's part of what, it was part of how I became a Christian. But once I started looking through this and go, what was the original design? How were things intended to be? Only then were my eyes opened to the reasons why people are getting so sick, which is why we're so successful. We have a 90 to 95% success rate in reversing Crohn's and colitis, diseases that we're told are impossible. It's autoimmune. There's nothing we can do. You're stuck on drugs for life. 5-year-olds, 20-year-olds coming in perfectly healthy. Boom, they're sick. The doctor goes, yeah, here's the drugs. You're a lifer now. We can turn them around in a couple of weeks once we find the root. But it's because we understand how we were originally designed. And that lens is what's given me the ability. This is what gave me the clarity and the vision. And truthfully, it's a gift. I'm not a doctor, but here I am educating doctors.
This episode is brought to you by FullScript. When it comes to nutritional supplements, I don't trust my family's health to drugstores or warehouse clubs. I use FullScript. They curate dozens of professional-grade brands only available through healthcare practitioners such as myself. Whether you're dealing with a serious health challenge or simply want to age more gracefully, FullScript should be a part of your daily routine. It is mine. When you're finished listening to this episode, go to my website, davidsandstrom.com/FullScript, create an account using my link, and you'll lock in a 10% discount for life. Welcome to the Natural Health Matters podcast, where it's all about maximizing your health potential so that you can look and feel your best at any age. I'm your host, David Sandstrom, and this is episode number 131. Today we have on the show Josh Dech. Josh is an ex-paramedic and holistic nutritionist specializing in gut health. He's been recruited to the Priority Health Academy as a medical lecturer, helping educate doctors on the holistic approach to gut health and complex digestive issues. Josh, welcome to Natural Health Matters.
It is an absolute pleasure to be here, David. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's really a pleasure having you on. You're such an expert, and I'm really looking forward to hearing some of your expertise here on the gut and the complexity of a human being. But first, I'd like to start off with, how did you go from being a paramedic to a holistic nutritionist?
That's probably the question I get asked the most, and it's one of my favorite to answer. Way back when I was in my late teens, I was 19, maybe 20 when I started as a paramedic. And I very quickly realized I was picking people up over and over and over again for the same health conditions. I picked them up, besides trauma, but I picked someone up for a heart attack or a stroke or a diabetes-related incident or whatever it was. Yeah. I'd take them to the hospital. They'd either get more of the same medication or get the medication changed, and they'd be sent back home, and I'd see them a couple weeks later for the exact same issue. It was a cyclical health sickness. It was really sick care, not health care, and it's not what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And so I like to say God really put me into a place where I do what I do now. And so I've been in the fitness world for a long time. I used to do bodybuilding and, fitness. And I thought, well, I'll get a job as a personal trainer. So I moved across Canada. I actually tried, David, to become a paramedic. I wanted to do it elsewhere. And when I went across Canada, I couldn't get my license transferred. And it wasn't even a medical exam. It was jurisprudence. They asked questions like, how many members of what board will sit in the hearing committee if there's a complaint against you for professional misconduct? There's things that no paramedic needs to know.
It don't matter a hill of beans, right?
No, there are an entire committee of people who have that job. And I tried this test. It was open book online. I had myself, a friend who was transferring, and my dad, who's a computer programmer, all going through and speed finding keywords on these documents, trying to find the answers to this open book exam. I failed it 7 times by 1 or 2 points every single time. And then they'd show me where it was in the paperwork. We just looked there. It wasn't there. I swear God just put a blind over our eyes and said, you will not be a paramedic anymore. And so I became a personal trainer. It's what I kind of did in the first place anyway. I was really interested. And one of the first clients who came to see me, her name was Lynn, and she was 57 years old. And we started together. She was on 17 pills, David, for breakfast with insulin, 9 more pills and insulin for bed. She had high blood pressure, slept with a CPAP machine. Her work actually had her on the disability list. And so all these issues she was dealing with, by 59, she was off all but 2 medications. Her eyesight actually got better. Like, she had to get her glasses changed. Her prescription was better. And at age 59, she broke a world record as a weightlifter in the raw powerlifting division.
Wow. And how long was she seeing you as a client at that point?
2 years.
2 years. Oh, wow. That's really awesome.
Went from 26 pills and disability to breaking world records. And she kept breaking them for the next several years till she was about 62 when she retired. And it just showed me how amazing the human body is. Its complexity and its ability to heal itself is one of the coolest things. It is designed to heal. And my sick care process as a paramedic was only in the way of that. We were simply masking symptoms, and symptoms arise from dysfunction. The body's signaling processes are remarkable. Any symptom we have is dysfunction presenting in some way, and we just mask it, and we gave her the tools to heal, and look what it did. And that's effectively where I'm at now. I followed that chain of events, and I specialize in gut disease.
That's awesome. I'm glad you mentioned Designed to Heal, because I'm going to have a guy named Dr. Ben Rawl on the show in a couple of weeks. And his podcast and his book is titled exactly that, Designed to Heal.
I'm familiar with it. It's brilliant.
You know him? Okay, yeah. I think he's going to be a great interview. He seems like a really solid guy and a great human being. But anyway, since you mentioned it, let's talk a little bit about the body's ability to heal itself. Can you dive into that a little bit deeper? Because when it comes to the medical paradigm, they don't really believe in that. They believe that your headache is caused by an aspirin deficiency, right? It's tongue in cheek, but you know what I'm saying, right?
Exactly.
So can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an excellent way of putting it. Ironically enough, we see the same thing in dentistry, that cavities are a fluoride deficiency, but it's not. It's really amazing when we look at what it means to be designed to heal. Right, every aspect of our body is reparative and regenerative from day one. And if we even look at the concept, a very stark difference we can't deny. Look at indigenous tribes who live on the land, right? Basically as close to the Garden of Eden as you can possibly get. They're living, they're hunting, they're eating off the trees, they're barefoot in the grass, they're rising and sleeping with the sunshine. And those people, they are healthy. They don't have the fertility issues we do. They don't have cavities. How many times have you looked at a National Geographic and seen perfectly white teeth? We don't have that here. We have crooked teeth. We have yellow teeth. We have all kinds. And those issues come from a modern lifestyle, which is further and further away than how we were originally designed to work with the earth. My wife and I talk about it. Have you ever seen Avatar?
Yes.
The blue aliens, right? We talk about Earth in the original design sort of having been like Pandora, where everything was designed to integrate together. The animals would, integrate with humans, and humans with the grass, and the flowers and leaves would sing, and all these cool things. But it's really interesting when we look back at it. The reason I bring up these indigenous tribes is they have elders, right? 80s, still going out hunting, still working, 90s, 100 years old, contributing to society. We have elderly who are a burden, who are sick, who are deteriorating. And so the body being designed to heal, very simply put, is that every inflammatory condition, right? In fact, 93% of the leading causes of death are connected to our gut. But every inflammatory condition of some kind is a signal saying something is wrong. The only reasons those things went wrong in the first place is because we've strayed away from the original design. We've gone into a modern lifestyle made by mankind who effectively, it's modern slavery. I mean, really, right? We go to work, we're on the grind all day. We work 9 to 5, sometimes 9 to 9. We barely get an hour to ourselves. We're high stress, high function. Our food is fake. Our nutrients are void. We're not getting sunshine. We're not touching the earth. We're not doing anything we were supposed to do. And we have these diseases. And inflammation, illness is a presentation. A diagnosis is just a word in the medical language that we use to describe symptoms in a snapshot. It's a very easy way to understand what's going on.
That's right. It's a collection of symptoms.
Exactly. It's a collection of symptoms. Exactly. And so we label that, we identify with that, but these other people don't have these diagnoses because they don't live the life we live. Yeah. And that is effectively how we're designed to heal. We're not even designed to have disease.
Absolutely. Well, the mission statement of the podcast, and I often say this, is we maximize our health potential by aligning our lives more fully with God's natural design for spirit, mind, and body. So God, as our creator, he has preferences as to how we treat our spirit, mind, and body. And when we get in alignment with that design, well, health tends to follow. There's no guarantee, but that's because God has our well-being in mind when he gives us an instruction. That's what tends to happen. God can use trials or a physical ailment to get our attention and help us to grow spiritually, because that ultimately is what he's mostly concerned with. But, I don't want to let my poor lifestyle choices cause a trial that God would prefer to spare me from.
Mm,
right? So that's what we're talking
100%.
about here. And so let's see, there was another thought I had there. Um, anyway, do you have anything else to add there?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting you bring that up as being spared these trials on the opposite end of that spectrum, right? Everything's push pull, everything's plus minus. If you are ill, you cannot live to your full potential. You cannot do what you're supposed to do. You cannot go out. You cannot speak. You cannot teach. You cannot engage. You cannot interact. Right? I mean, I specialize, as you know, in Crohn's and colitis, which is
Yes.
the worst gut disease we can get. And it
Hmm.
can start as benign as a little bit of bloat. And then it can get much, much worse over time, or it can come up seemingly out of the blue. But there's always a reason. But we look at that, these people can't have lives. They can't have intimacy. Their sex lives, their personal lives, their relationships get destroyed. Their work life gets destroyed. They can't go
Hmm.
out and play with their kids. Their joints hurt. They can't leave the home because their urgency in the bowel is so severe. And so if we're ignoring these things, it's not just, well, it's health I'll deal with. It's like, I cannot live to the potential I was designed to live to.
That's
And
right.
if we don't give ourselves that latitude, I mean, your body is your temple, right?
Yep.
And so I think that's there for a reason. There's a lot more to it. And when we really extrapolate out the consequences of poor health, it goes beyond just our comfort or discomfort.
That's right. Ephesians 2:10 says, "We are created for good works that God
Mm,
planned beforehand. We are his masterpieces or his workmanship in order to perform kingdom work." So
absolutely.
if we are in a state of compromised health, if our energy is sagging and our mood is sour and our mental clarity is not what it should be, we are going to be compromised in our ability to fulfill our purpose. Why we're walking the earth.
Absolutely. Unquestionably. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So we talked a little bit about the body, but let's jump into why or what is the best use of allopathic or modern Western style medicine, and what
Mm.
is an inappropriate use of that, and contrast that with a naturalistic health, if you could.
Absolutely. So when we look at health and Western medicine, they are fantastic. Some of the best in the world at emergencies and surgeries, but
Right.
it stops there.
Hmm.
Everything we do is masking symptoms, right? If I go in and I got into a motorcycle accident, my arm ripped off, I don't want lavender oil. You know what I mean? I want a surgeon. I want an anesthetist. I want the best of the best to reconnect my nerves and get my body working as it should.
Right.
On the other hand, that's it though. That's acute. Now, if I have something that comes up that's an inflammatory condition, or you have a gut issue, you have Crohn's or colitis, you have arthritis, any kind of itis, any kind of diagnoses, they do the same thing. They medicate you and send you on your way. They operate on you and send you on your way. That is acute treatment for acute inflammation or acute illness, something that is fast, quick, accidental trauma. Unfortunately, we have this degrading process in the body where we are eating foods that are void of nutrients, or eating artificial foods that were never designed to eat, right? Things your great grandmother would never even recognize and would be afraid to put into her body.
Right.
We have these things that we consume. We have these lifestyles that are chronically stressful. We have 1 billion pounds of pesticides put onto our food every single year. We use 17,000 plus different chemicals or pesticides on our food, herbicides, fungicides, rodenticides, all that on our
Hmm.
food. And we're becoming increasingly toxic. And so what they do then in Western medicine is treat it as if it's acute. You have arthritis, that is arthro, joint, itis, inflammation. So you have inflammation in your joints that give you an anti-inflammatory. But nobody asks, why do you have inflammation in your joints? The same things in gut disease. We have acid reflux, seems relatively benign. We assume, well, it must be acid. We give antacids. In my practice, the number one cause for acid reflux is actually low stomach acid. And then on the far end of the severity spectrum, we have Crohn's and colitis, which anybody can get. Really, it's not just a bad genetic or random thing. The stats on that would blow you away. But these are severity, and nobody ever asks why. Like, autoimmune diseases don't fall out of the sky and drop onto your head. Something has to cause the immune system to imbalance. Or if it's not actually autoimmune, I don't believe all these cases are autoimmune. And that's what I argue in my lectures. So why do you have inflammation? Not just, well, it's there, here's an anti-inflammatory. And
Yes.
that is a stark difference. Whereas
Right.
functional medicine peels back the layers and figures out why this happened in the first place to undo that so that your body can heal itself.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. That's a great explanation. I wanted to point out that a lot of times people will blame things like heart disease or cancer or You name it. There's a long list of disease names. And the doctors, going to the doctor and say, Doc, why do I have this? And the answer will be, well, it's probably just in your genetics, right? It's a genetic weakness. Must run in your family. Well, if you subscribe to the medical paradigm, which is basically a reductionist view of a human being, we're nothing more than a random collection of atoms and molecules.
We're a machine. Yeah,
we're just a biological machine. If you believe in that, then you would say that, well, God has nothing to do with this. If he does exist, he's got his hands off. And then if you subscribe to that mentality, you would have to believe that it takes millions of years for genetic mutations to occur. Well, why do we see things happening in 1 or 2 generations here? And we didn't even know what heart disease was for the most part in the early part of the 20th century. But I think the first heart attack in the United States was recorded in something like 1915. But now it's the leading or the number 2 cause of death. So if it's genetics, how did our genetics change so rapidly? That's the question I have for the reductionist. That doesn't add up to me.
Well, you know what, David? I'm so glad you brought that up because that is the core. That is the hook line message of my most recent lecture I've done for the Priority Health Academy. It's a functional medicine academy. And I've had the absolute privilege to be helping educate and work with doctors in the holistic methods of reversing these diseases. And mine was actually, again, on Crohn's colitis. And the question I had asked, I said, if we look at the data and the stats, starting in 1990, we know, according to the CDC's own info, there was 1.5, upwards of, but no more than 3 million. So about 1.5 million cases of inflammatory bowel disease, that's your Crohn's colitis umbrella, across the world, actively being seen and treated by a doctor. That was 1990. In 2020, it's 7 million. So how did we 3 or 5x and call it just genetic or idiopathic, right? No known cause. If it's no known cause, you better figure it out pretty freaking quickly.
Right.
But here's one more tidbit. North America is the inflammatory bowel disease capital of the world. Now, those listening go, I don't have inflammatory bowel, I don't have Crohn's or colitis. This is for you too, because anybody can get it. It can be a progressive disease and wear and tear. So you have to know this. 50% of the world's population of inflammatory bowel disease is in North America, who's less than 5% of the global population.
Wow.
So when 5% has 50%, that is a statistical impossibility to just be genetic. And the growth of 5x in 30 years can't possibly be idiopathic, which is no known cause. So how can we say this, again, this reduction is while the human body is breaking down, it's a lack of medication or lack of pharmaceuticals. It's a lack of things we refuse to measure. It's the 8,000 plus chemicals we approve into food and food additives every year that simply get put on the GCS or generally considered safe list. They're tested individually. They're not tested together. And we have over 100,000 different artificial man-made chemicals in our food, plus that 8,000 or so being added every year, 7,000, whatever the number is. And so these breakdowns, these processes, I'm with you. It can't possibly be genetic.
Not even to mention genetically modified food or pesticides, herbicides that go into farming. We're ingesting, in a lot of ways, fake food these days, aren't we?
Yeah.
If you deviate from God's design, and just to illustrate this a little bit more, if you take an animal, capture an animal in the wild, they're healthy and strong. Let's say it's a giraffe. And then you put them in a zoo, they become less healthy. And a lot of times these animals that are in zoos, they can't even reproduce. They lose their vitality. They lose their health because they're not in their natural environment anymore. Well, I would suggest that we're living in a zoo. We are not living on the earth the way God designed us to live. And that's the reason why we have such skyrocketing chronic diseases just left and right, because we've gotten away from the basics, haven't we?
Well, you know what's interesting is in North America, we've gone away from the basics even more. We're now approving lab-grown meat, like animal tissue grown in vats. We have, like you mentioned, GMOs. I don't know if you knew this, David, but Vladimir Putin, whether you guys agree with his policies or not, that's totally fine. But he actually has banned all GMO crottle. He has actually banned all GMO cattle and crops. That's the word I was looking for.
You just invented a new word there.
It's a cow with flowers growing out of its head. But they're banned, and it's actually considered an act of terrorism in his country now to grow these GMOs because they're so bad. They
Yeah.
banned fake meat. But in the
Yeah.
US, because sickness is so profitable on an insurance-based model, the FDA lets anything and everything come in with very
Yeah.
little regard for human health.
I was thinking this morning about that very concept, and the song from that Eddie Money did for Miami Vice back in the '80s, and the lyrics go, "It's the lure of easy money. It's got a very strong appeal." Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we're seeing that lived out, and we're suffering the consequences of that. That the pursuit of profits. I believe in the free market economy, but
Sure.
it can't be void of ethics. It can't be void of
Yes.
virtue. We've got to practice the golden rule in business, and that is treat other people the way you want to be treated. So you can't just say, well, to heck with your health. I'm going after the bottom line. We see a lot of that today, and we've got to be very, very careful who we're getting our information from.
Mm. Unfortunately, the FDA, the pharmaceutical companies, and I like to joke my hairline's back here because my tinfoil hat keeps rubbing it back. Um, but the truth is, the FDA and the pharmaceutical companies are some of the most evil organizations on planet Earth. If I were to go into the heart of any war zone and sell a bottle of water for $100, that's war profiteering. I'm a criminal.
Right.
But if you sell an EpiPen that costs $2 to make for $700, it's called free market. And so it's a very different lens when you have the money to pay for said lens. And it's really unfortunate that, the pharmaceutical industry also governs medicine and healthcare, what they learn in schools, what they get taught, what studies get published. We're conditioned to see this hard evidence. Show me the randomized, controlled, double-blind trials. Well, those cost millions of dollars to do. Millions. And who pays for that? The people who can benefit from the study coming on the back end, who can use those studies to quote and sell more products. And so, unfortunately, we've lost our way. We've lost our way with the herbs that God has given us and put them on planet Earth. Many you can grow in your own backyard. In fact, there's a book, I think it's called Flora and Fauna, or Forests and Flora, something like that. But it actually come out in the Civil War, the American Civil War. It was just herbs used in the Carolinas that you could find in North and South Carolina. And they found that these herbs, they suspected, had extended the war by 2 to 3 years because their healing properties were so potent. But that's the stuff we find on Earth. But you can't patent that now, can you?
Well, in the late 19th century, medical doctors were naturopaths. They were naturopathic doctors. They would use, as you said, herbs. They would use homeopathics. They'd use essential oils, and other therapies like hot cold therapy and sunlight and connecting with the earth, all that, diet. But then something shifted in the early part of the 20th century, didn't it? I know you're familiar with that. So can you speak a little bit about what the Rockefeller family did?
J.T. Rockefeller, one of my favorite people on earth, I say with some begrudge. Unfortunately, back in it was after the Industrial Revolution, they had all these extra byproducts, these chemical byproducts. They found petroleum, right? They can use it to make our clothes, they make our computers, they make everything with petroleum products. And they found they could actually take this waste product. This is right at the rise of things like penicillin, right? A lot of life-saving medication has come up, but they found these pharmaceuticals could be made from these waste products. And so that suddenly became a market. John T. Rockefeller had all of his scientists and his doctors go through and completely rewrite all the medical textbooks, everything herbal, anything Ayurvedic, anything homeopathic or holistic, over the next couple of decades, became scrubbed from the medical textbooks. And by the time the 40s and 50s rolled around, it was pharmaceuticals, it was drugs. Look at cough syrups. They're no longer using antitussive plants that we can grow in our own backyard. We're using, back in the 40s and 50s, they were using morphine and all kinds of stuff in cough syrup. That's probably why our parents could walk, to school uphill both ways in the snow barefoot. So it's all the drugs that they were using. But pharmaceuticals became the new norm. That became studied. That became pushed. They sponsored medical schools, bought out a lot of education and curriculum and started paying for it. And then here we are, 150 years later, and the very thought of using herbs is considered quackery.
Right.
And so those terms, I believe the term quack was actually invented by the same regime as well, if I'm not mistaken. And so this whole thing came out where they used to use sound therapy and light therapy, the infrared that God gave us through fire, through sunlight. Those are some of the most healing things we have. Actually earthing and touching your feet to the ground. We can see, using science we have now, on live blood analysis, how it improves your blood flow and circulation, oxygenation, even pH in the body. And so the things we are given, we're supposed to integrate with, but we all wear rubber shoes. We all sit indoors. We don't breathe fresh air. Our windows actually block out infrared light. We all only get that nasty UV coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of degradation of the human capabilities and human health because of that. Not even, we haven't even touched on gut health yet. It's quite amazing how this all ties together.
I want to get to that for sure. Another thing that you left out on grounding is it acts as a powerful antioxidant.
Huge.
If you sleep on a grounding mat, it's like taking a handful of antioxidants in the middle of the night, because it's that good of a free radical quencher. So it's just, again, that's our God-given design. Our foot is designed to walk barefoot. Our foot is not engineered to walk with shoes on.
Yeah,
right?
I'll tell you, David, I'm actually barefoot right now.
There you
I'm
go.
actually standing on a grounding mat. That's where my feet are planted while I'm working all day long.
I got my grounding mat beneath me too, but I actually have socks on, I have to admit. But I'm probably getting about half as much grounding as you.
If you saw me lean down earlier, that's what I was doing, is taking my socks off to get ready for the call.
I should have done the same thing. But that's really cool. Yeah, well, for sure, we're like-minded, right? So we want to get to gut health for sure, but there's another thing that I want to talk to you about, and that is the complexity of a human being. I mean, our bodies are complex, right? And doctors and nurses, again, they do a lot of good. They save a lot of lives.
Amazing.
But their paradigm that they're taught in school is that we are bodies only. And human beings are more than that, right? And we are spirit, we have a mind, and we live in a body. Genesis 2:7 says, "The Lord God formed the man out of the dust of the ground," so there's the body, "and then he breathed into him the breath of life," there's the spirit, "and the man became a living being," and the word for being is soul. So there it is, very succinctly, very plainly, right? Just matter-of-factly, there's a human being, spirit, soul, or mind, and body. So can you speak to that complexity a little bit and how that works and how they interact with one another?
Yeah, I mean, we look at Father, Son, Holy Spirit. We're created in the same image. We're trifold beings as well. And, soul and body are very, very interesting. Spirit is interesting because it's not something that science can tangibly measure yet, or even wants to measure a lot of the time. But, I believe that everything has frequency and vibration, right? We are created in a certain way. If God created everything through the spoken word, our words have power. And we've seen that. We can see that through studies using rice or plants, where you take, IKEA did it for a commercial about anti-bullying. They took a plant, two of them side by side, and one had a speaker playing constantly in the exact same conditions. You are beautiful. You are green. You are luscious. You will grow. You are special. You are precious. And it bloomed and bloomed. And after a month, the other one, it says, "You're ugly. You're brown. You're going to die. Your leaves are falling off." And that plant did die. And so our frequency and vibration of our words matters, which actually ties us back to sound therapy that they used to use. I mean, Nikola Tesla started using this with doctors. We can see now, there's TED Talks you can look up on YouTube, sound therapy and certain frequencies and vibration, like beehives, actually break up cancer cells. And so these things are already there. One segue, and I'll come back to the rest. My dad was telling me a cool story about some missionaries over in Africa, or wherever it was they were, Tanzania or something. And one of them had actually gotten bit by a venomous snake. They took a taser and they tased it in an X pattern twice. Tase. And what it did is that electricity actually restructured the proteins, apparently, so I've been told, and it healed them. That venom became a healthy thing, which is really interesting back to original design. Under different canopy, under a vapor canopy where water used to come from the earth, say pre-flood, under these certain conditions, fruit flies, for example, scientists have recreated this stuff where fruit flies would live 7 days instead of 24 hours, which gives more clout to, Methuselah and Moses living hundreds and hundreds of years. And so it's really interesting, the original design before the flood, before the fall. And so what we figured was that snakes were actually part of the original design because they use infrared. They seek heat. They go, well, it helps them seek out prey. Well, what if They were originally designed to help seek out infection and bite with venom under different electromagnetic field and circumstance that would then become healing for you, right? For that infection or that wound.
Interesting theory.
It's an interesting theory, right? So things to explore. But that's how, I believe the body is connected to earth. If we look at the soul and look at the spirit, I mean, again, frequency vibration in life is us. Everything vibrates. Everything gives off a frequency. Everything gives off energy. And so we can track a lot of this. We know we have an aura in a field around us. Interestingly enough, it goes out about 6 feet, where this aura of energy and electricity can interact, but even our microbiomes, or what's called our holobiome, and that is our bacteria, our microbes, our skin, these cells, these things that actually surround us, kind of like Pigpen from Charlie Brown, right? It's a 6-foot thing that goes around us, and you actually interact with people then that way. So everything is designed to work in harmony together. And it's when we look at all these moving parts and pieces, we can start to understand the breakdown of the human body and why that's happening. And we can start to really fix some of these diseases that are just told are autoimmune or unfixable.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up about the energetic aura that each human being has. And I think every living thing has that as well. And a lot of people will hear that and say, well, it's kind of woo-woo. I don't know if I can really, buy into that just yet. And I'll ask them this question. If 2 people are having a heated argument in a room and you walked in a silent moment, could you tell that they were arguing? Almost everybody says, yeah, I think I could sense that. That's energy, right? You can
that is
feel
a tangible energy. Yes. And it's so undeniable. I mean, when you spend enough time in someone's aura, right? Not only, I mean, there's a whole connection. We can get into the microbes and how they influence personality. But you spend enough time around somebody, you spend enough time around your spouse, you just know, you can look across the room and know what they're thinking. You pick up their mannerisms, you walk into a room, you know how they're feeling because you're attuned to that energy, to that aura. And it is testable. We can tell. We have scientific instruments now that can actually measure it. So for those who say, no, it doesn't exist, you're not looking because it's out there. We know now.
Yeah, it's out there. Well, another obvious example is an FM radio. You've got an antenna in your car. It used to stick up out of the fender, but now it's inside. But, these energetic radio frequencies are beaming through the air. They're invisible. We can't feel them or see them or touch them. But your radio, your FM stereo, can pick it up and reproduce that sound in your car as you're driving down the highway. How is that possible?
Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing when you think about it. We just take these things for granted because it's just so everyday. But it's there. And, energy is everywhere. And, we can't explain it all. We don't know where electricity comes from, but we can make it. But we don't know how it's made, really. It comes from God's design.
We harness it. Everything's electrical. Our human bodies are electrical. The heart contracts at minus 70 millivolts. It contracts. And so every cell passes electricity, and it goes down to the smallest and smallest atoms and molecules and how these things transfer in and out of the body to make our cells fire. And so it really is an amazing, amazing design. We are electrical beings, vibration-based beings, verbal beings filled with spirit. And once we understand this and can look into it, we can finally understand the roots of sickness and disease from a different lens. And it's interesting because in my field, specializing in gut disease, I don't often use in my specific field medicine to evangelize. It can turn people off very quickly who are just looking for the science. But on the other hand, I will tell them that my lens, my view as a Christian, and it wasn't till it's part of what, was part of how I became a Christian. But once I start looking through this and go, what was the original design? How are things intended to be? Only then were my eyes opened to the reasons why people are getting so sick, which is why we're so successful. We have a 90 to 95% success rate in reversing Crohn's and colitis, diseases that we're told are impossible. It's autoimmune. There's nothing we can do. You're stuck on drugs for life. 5-year-olds, 20-year-olds coming in perfectly healthy. Boom, they're sick. The doctor goes, yeah, here's the drugs. You're a lifer now. We can turn them around in a couple of weeks once we find the root. But it's because we understand how we were originally designed. And that lens is what's given me the ability. This is what gave me the clarity and the vision. And truthfully, it's a gift. I'm not a doctor, but here I am educating doctors. This is a gift he gave me in a clarity and wisdom and understanding in this field.
I'm glad you said that, Josh, because the medical teaching the medical paradigm is that they will treat the illness that has the person. In naturopathy, we treat the person that has the illness. And it's a very, very different way of approaching health, right? And I'm sure that you do the latter when it comes to helping your patients with gut health. So could you start off when talking about gut health? Can you talk about what exactly is Crohn's and colitis?
Yeah. So there's two ways we get these gut diseases. Now, Crohn's and colitis as an overall, it's an umbrella that basically describes inflammation of the GI tract. Colitis or ulcerative colitis is the colon. Crohn's disease can be anything from mouth to anus. So you can get ulcers in the mouth, you get inflammation, but most of them are accompanied by either severe loose bowels or severe constipation. Oftentimes there's mucus and blood. There's lots of pain. I've had people come in, David, 30, 40, even 50 bowel movements a day who just, have to keep stuff in the car. They have to wear diapers. Like I said earlier, they can't leave the house because the urgency and inflammation is so severe, especially in the lower rectum. And what we need to understand is people, again, I mentioned this, they think, well, it can never happen to me, or it's just genetic, or it doesn't run in my family. Anybody can get it. We acquire these diseases in two main ways. Only two. These are the only ways. Now, there are genetic predispositions, right? But 75% is all lifestyle. If it is truly genetic, only 25% is genetic. And genes can load the gun, but they don't pull the trigger. It's traumas, it's lifestyle, it's some kind of insult to the biomes or the tissues that can cause this. So that's number one. It's going to be acute, right? Something has to happen. It's a mold infection. It's a heavy doses of antibiotics. I'm working with a woman right now. She's in her mid 30s. Over the last 3 years, she was given 30 plus doses of antibiotics because her doctors, she kept getting recurrent UTIs. Well, we're actually looking at the liver and oxalates, and we're going to a cellular path to see what's going on that way. But they gave her so many antibiotics. She got ulcerative colitis, and they went, oh, yeah, it's probably the antibiotics that did it, but you have this disease now, so good luck, Godspeed. And that's not fair either, because this is induced. Like, that should be a lawsuit at the very least. I have another fella. He's in his mid-20s. This comes back to the genetics. His doctor said, well, you got it because you're Jewish. Your parents are Jewish. It probably runs in the family. It's just genetic.
Brother.
Right? What a cop-out answer. And so it doesn't make sense. Like, nobody has it. Well, we actually sat down for more than 6 minutes, 7 minutes, which is the average doctor spend per patient in the United States. We sat down for 35, 45 minutes. We did a whole history, went back. Because most people come in and they'll tell me, here is my current disease process. And I think I got a bit mixed up there. I was saying chronic acute. It can either wear and tear and happen to you, or there's an insult to the area. So I'll clarify that. But this fella, we did a proper history. We found out he was an acute case of ulcerative colitis. He was perfectly healthy until he started a brand new job in HVAC. 2 months into his job, he developed some irritable bowel, went to the doctor. They said, you have IBS. He said, okay, no problem. It got progressively worse. 6 months after that diagnosis, they diagnosed him with ulcerative colitis, which could develop and turn into Crohn's disease. And so we did a history on him, found out he wasn't wearing his PPE, his personal protective equipment. He was in HVAC. I figured, well, it sounds like, it looks like, and it smells like you got a mold infection. So we did a urine test, a test for mycotoxins, that's mold toxic infection. And it turns out he did have ochratoxin A, which is a very common mold, which is known to attack the gut, the kidneys, the liver, which explains all of his issues.
Wow.
3 weeks in, he's already feeling better when his doctor was about to give him medication for life.
Wow.
Yeah, I have a 5-year-old, exact same thing, just minus the HVAC. He was perfectly healthy. They moved into a new house. All of a sudden, he's got ulcerative colitis. We did a family history. He's got 2 sisters who are having behavioral issues, cognitive issues. Dad's got asthma. Mom's got eczema. Got a GI map. His bacteria, that's a bacterial measurement profile of your stool. His bacteria was all over the place. One of the worst I've ever seen, even in adults. Doesn't make sense. He's 5. We did a test on him because the whole family history, the proper history we took, he was also a mold infection, and his body was riddled with it. The most mold I've ever seen in one body.
Wow.
And so now we can actually take intervention. Another girl came back after travel. She's in her mid-20s. And I see people all the time of all ages. And her doctor said, yep, you got ulcerative colitis. You're a lifer. She goes, but I've never had bowel issues. How did it happen? Well, it's just genetic. Oh, well, major parasitic infection. Got that fixed. 7 weeks in, issues are completely gone. And so that's our acute process of how people get it. Then there's the wear and tear process, which I've seen a lot too.
For lab testing, you generally do a stool sample?
Generally. There are 2 tests that I like to do the most often. One is a stool sample. That's your bacterial profile measurement. And the other one is called an OAT. That's your organic acids test. And that one is, if you're familiar with them, I know in your practice you'd be familiar. If your listeners aren't, everything in the body produces byproducts. Every cell produces byproducts. You know, when you go to the gym and work out, you can produce this lactic acid. That's the burn. We have these acids. Toxins produce acids. Cells produce acids. You pee them out. So we do a urine test to measure all the organic acids in and out of balance in your body. And it tells us on a cellular systemic level what's going on. We can really explore in that way as well. And they point us as kind of a bird's eye view into where to start to go, combined with history and careful symptomatology, which can take 30 minutes to an hour at least. Some practitioners I know will do a 4-hour interview in order to figure out all of your health issues and problems. And we go like right back to how you were born. Were you vaginal? Were you C-section? Were you breastfed? Were you bottle fed? What kind of home did you grow up in? All kinds of stuff that we can trace back to birth to figure out what started this issue. That allows us to reverse the problem.
Yeah. Wow. That's really awesome. You know, I was going back to that story you said about the guy that had the acute mold infection from the HVAC work. You know, if he would have continued on that path, you know, maybe it'd be take a decade or more. I don't know, but he could get to a point, and many people have, that the doctors say, well, you have no choice but to remove your colon. Right. And I have a buddy that actually happened to, because they never did figure out what was going on, you know, and that just goes to show how, you know, how drastic the medical approach can be. You know, we name it, blame it, and tame it. We take your collection of symptoms, we put a name to it, called a diagnosis or a disease. Then they blame your symptoms on that disease. Then they want to tame it with drugs, and if the drugs don't work, it's surgery. And,
Yes.
you know, that can be tragic at times. It really can be. And I know, hats off to you for really doing the hard work and, you know, going the extra mile and working with these people and changing their lives, right? I mean, sure, you probably have a lot of people that say, you know, Doc, you saved my life.
I'm working with a fellow right now. He's a bodybuilder, relatively, like, never know, very healthy, fit looking guy. And he's in his late 30s, early 40s, and he looks great. I mean, he's, like I said, he's a bodybuilder. You'd never suspect him to be sick, but he's got severe ulcerative colitis. And again, 20, 30 bowel movements a day with pain and blood. He's on all these biologics and immunosuppressives, and they're not doing anything. He's just getting worse and worse and worse. And his doctors, he was up for colon surgery, and he actually posted in one of my Facebook groups about the surgery he was asking for advice on. And I said, tell you what, just meet with me, one phone call. And if you haven't changed your mind by then, that's okay. Like, do what you got to do. We jumped on a call. He got into the program. We just made some simple dietary changes. His symptoms were cut in half within 2 weeks, just with diet alone. And he says, I was ready to get my colon cut out. He says, I will never do that now ever again. He says, well, it's not even on my mind because I know how possible this is.
That's amazing.
It's a combination of a lot of things. It really is amazing. But the body is meant to heal itself.
Absolutely. You know, I have a colleague. He's not really a friend, but a guy I know. He works out of LA. And he often gets some celebrity clients. And he says, Dave, you know, I have these people come in. My policy is I don't mention names. But if I mention these names, you'd know who these people are. They're beautiful people. On the outside, they are stunningly beautiful. But on the inside, after I do the lab workup, they are in really poor health. It happens all the time.
All the time. I mean, Drake, he's a very popular rapper. He recently just set aside his career because he has gut issues and he's not able to perform and do what he's supposed to do. And I can look at him. I would bet that we could probably fix him in 90 days because we just have to look differently. But even the best money in the world, doesn't matter how much you have, if you're putting it into the wrong view, you're going to keep getting the wrong answers, or at least answers that simply mask your symptoms. And so we get guys like this. I mean, Dan Reynolds, he's a singer, lead singer for Imagine Dragons. Love their music. Right? Millions and millions and hundreds of millions of downloads. But he's also got ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease. That's one of the two. So it doesn't matter who you are. You can get it. And again, if you're not looking in the right spot, you're going to continue to be sick. And it's just having a reverence for the complexity of the human body and understanding. I mean, we've really just scratched the surface here on gut and what it means and how it connects and how it works. But the whole point being that it is one of the most complex systems in the human body. We understand less about the gut and the gut microbiomes than we do the human brain.
Yeah, Yeah, the amount of cells and bacteria down there are incredible. And then the nervous system connection between the gut and the brain. We don't have time to get into that today. I'm going to have you back on the show, Josh. We'll talk about that
For
more in
sure.
depth one
Yeah.
day for sure. But if this message is resonating with someone and they'd like to get a hold of you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, best way to do that, there's two places you can reach me. One is through my podcast. The other is directly through my website. And through there, of course, you can contact me. You can join our Facebook groups. You have all kinds of stuff. Again, I do specialize in Crohn's and colitis. I do see a fair bit of severe irritable bowel syndrome as well. So if you're dealing with gut issues, you need help, you can certainly reach us on our website. We work all over the world. That's gutsolution.ca. And then the podcast is called Reversible, the Ultimate Gut Health Podcast, and that's spelled reverse able. You can always check the website, reverseablepod.com. And we do all kinds of talks there. We do quick tips. We do interviews with world famous experts and professionals, some of the top doctors on planet Earth. And that's the best way to get a hold of us. But if you're looking for help with your gut, schedule a call, head to gutsolution.ca, and we can certainly help you out, or at least talk to see if it's a good fit.
That is really awesome. And you said you had a free gift for the audience?
I do. So funny enough, on my podcast website, as well as my Gut Solution website, you can find some free programs because people, especially dealing with more minor gut issues, you don't need a full program. Those with Crohn's and colitis, absolutely. It's a very nuanced, complex disease process. But for those who are dealing with benign things, mild IBS, fatty liver, maybe you're dealing with acid reflux and bloating and some discomfort. Sorry, a little bing in there. My wiener dog's running around. Yeah, we have free programs on the website. So if you head over to either Reversible Pod or gutsolution.ca, click the tab that says free stuff. There are free programs that you can take and you can use for yourself. It's complete with meal plans, instructionals. There are supplement recommendations. And we've even put some links in there as well to specific podcast episodes about those topics so you can learn more about it and be fully versed. They're 15 to 20 page documents. They're very, very thorough. And that's just my free gift to the world. People shouldn't be sick. And if we can give you some very simple tools without having to spend a lot of money, that's what we want to do. That's
fantastic, Josh. I'll make sure to put all the links in the show notes for sure. Just one last question before I let you go. What is the most important thing that we talked about today that you'd like the audience to remember?
Wow, we did cover so much ground. The most important thing I would say from this conversation so far, and I know we'll get into a bit more in another episode here, David, is that just because your doctor tells you one thing, that doesn't mean it's your only option. It doesn't mean you're pigeonholed. It doesn't mean there's no other opinions. It doesn't mean other options don't exist. I had a fella come in, he's 15 years old, Crohn's disease, down to 93 pounds at 5'7", and just horribly, horribly ill. 8 weeks in, he gained 25 pounds. The symptoms were cut in half, if not 2/3. And he went back to his GI doctor who said, well, I'm glad you're gaining weight, but I don't love how you're going about it. They didn't want to see the tests. They didn't want to see the programs. They didn't want to speak to me. They didn't care. And not all doctors are like that. I'm actually where I am because there are some amazing medical doctors who said, I like what you're doing. Come into our circle and teach us. We want to learn. And they taught me much as well. And I meet with them every week. We meet with these doctors and learn. And so the whole moral of that one is just because you've been told one thing by a doctor or several doctors, it doesn't mean there aren't people out there who can help you. Sometimes it seeks becoming your own advocate, seeking other opinions, advocating for yourself against conventional wisdom, conventional medicine, and even what your friends and family might tell you. I have people all the time who join our programs and their families try to talk them out of it. Oh, it's a scam. It can't be done. We know there's no cure for this. And that doesn't mean you can't make progress. Doesn't mean you can't reverse. Doesn't mean you can't begin to heal. And so always seek another opinion. Always look outside the box and don't be afraid to ask hard questions.
Excellent. That is such good wisdom. Thank you, Josh. I really appreciate your time and sharing your wisdom with the Natural Nation today.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, David.
For more, go to the show notes page at davidsandstrom.com/131. There you can find links to all the resources that we mentioned. I put a summary of the episode there, as well as a video and an audio version of the podcast and more. Don't forget, I'm still looking to get to know my audience better. If you'd like to talk to me personally, go to my website, davidsandstrom.com/coffee talk, all one word, and schedule a 10-minute call with me. I'd love to chat with you. That's it for now. Thanks for listening. I'll talk with you next time. Be blessed.